This is your reality check.
Welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. Today is July 28th, 2020. I'm producer Pat, and with me is Cristina Roach.
Hey everyone.
Darren and Adam continue to record in isolation. We have 3 interesting segments for you today. Adam is going to talk to us about some feedback he got on a recent segment and look into which galaxy is the closest. Cristina, you're going to give us a bit of a history lesson on conspiracy theories. But first, we throw things to Darren, who looks into news stories that bricks were left out to incite violence during recent protests.
During the massive protests that were occurring in early June, do you happen to recall stories of bricks supposedly being left out for protesters for nefarious purposes? In this segment, I'll investigate whether that was indeed the case. First, was this a thing people were talking about? Well, it certainly was. A quick search reveals various articles on the topics, some with headlines like, quote, and there's another quote within it, random pile of bricks, quote, magically appearing at protests. And another headline, piles of bricks mysteriously sprouting up near riot hotspots all over the US have journalists demanding answers. As a little note, I am picking less reasonable headlines, but I think that captures most of the discussion I was seeing. Also, I do fear many of these websites might be nefarious in their own ways, but that's a story for another day. Second, I just want to point out how the language is being used here. In the first, quote, random pile of bricks is in quotes. When I see such a phrase, I sometimes wonder whether a determined pile of bricks would be any different. Also, magically? Clearly this is meant to have the reader infer something, but I'm willing to go on a limb here and say that the appearance of bricks was not due to magic. Breaking news. Now, the second one says mysteriously, which is much better, but the very nature of the headline makes it seem a bit more dramatic than journalists are doing their jobs trying to figure something out. Imagine another type of headline. Replicating cancer cells mysteriously happening all over the earth has scientists demanding answers. Now, I'll admit that's not entirely fair, and it's not fully analogous. If we don't accept the magical explanation, it means that there's a normal causal reason for the bricks appearing, and that means usually a person or an agent was behind it, which is less the case for many cancers. Although, another qualifier, clearly many cancers are due to the actions of people. Also, very quickly, that mysterious headline article has a tweet within it that says, quote, an explosion of patios being built as mysterious free piles of bricks appear nationwide on corners, end quote. Free piles? Really? Have you ever come across construction materials stacked nicely together on the sidewalk and thought, well, these must be free, like the free flowers in a public garden or the free cars in a parking lot? That's just silly. Okay, so third, the bricks issue seems to have several parts. A, are there actually bricks appearing near protesters? B, were these bricks put out for protesters? And C, who put them out for protesters, assuming A and B are true? Well, let's actually look at C first. Who put them out? Well, if you listen to the White House, those bricks were put there by Antifa. Alternatively, if you listen to others on social media, those bricks were clearly put out there by the police, or the government, or billionaires. And we all know the government is in the pocket of Big Brick. Wake up, sheeple. Oh, sorry, where was I? Let's go back to A. Are there actually bricks appearing near protesters? This seems mostly true in that there were so many protests and the protests covered so much ground in so many different cities that some of the protesters were definitely in close proximity to bricks. But what we really want to know is B. Were these bricks put out for the protesters? It seems not. In case after case, a video or photo showing some bricks, and of course, often having some inflammatory caption or something like #BaitBricks associated with it, has been shown to have a more benign, dull explanation. The bricks are for an ongoing construction project. The bricks were only out there for an hour during the day because they came off a truck and they were moved closer to the construction site, and on it goes. Such is life. Boring is good sometimes. Oh, if you happen to be curious about my sources, you can find links in the show notes for articles in Global News, CBC, BBC, and good old Snopes at trcpodcast.com. In fact, I think I'll quote the Snopes summary as it decently summarizes the issue. So this is all Snopes. The claim is, quote, government officials, law enforcement, billionaires, or Antifa groups nefariously placed pallets of bricks at protest sites in U.S. cities to stoke violence during June 2020 demonstrations against police brutality. And then Snopes has a what's true, what's false, and what's undetermined. So let's go through those. What's true? Quote, protesters in many major U.S. cities used bricks to cause destruction, or in some cases to injure police, while walking on streets during the 2020 demonstrations. What's false? No evidence suggests a coordinated effort existed on behalf of government entities or billionaires to place bricks on protest routes to incite violence during the demonstrations. Also, evidence showed that in many cases, suspicious, quote-unquote, bricks depicted on social media were on streets for ongoing construction projects, not, quote-unquote, planted for protesters. What's undetermined? Quote, it is possible that protesters themselves could have strategically placed bricks in easily accessible spots to facilitate causing property damage, though no evidence proved that this was indeed occurring. End quote. While it is understandable that important issues of racism and police brutality have people feeling emotionally charged, it is unfortunate that there's so much misinformation being spread. Just because there is a legitimate concern about police brutality does not mean that they are putting bricks out. But of course, trust is one of the issues at hand. More practically, it makes little sense for police to do that. You may have in mind a brick going through a store window, but it could also be thrown at police officers. So yes, one could say maybe they're being strategically provocative, but that's pretty risky because usually people don't want a brick thrown at them. And of course, more important, there's no evidence to support it whatsoever. I just want to make a general point in closing, and this may shock you, but you do not perceive everything that is going on. And I'm not being mystical or mysterious, simply that your goals drive your attention and thus what you will perceive and observe. This may not be surprising, but we often forget that it is indeed the case. Heck, it definitely seems like my peripheral vision is in color, but it isn't really. It's just some filling in by your brain. So what you believe affects what you see. Beyond politics and confirmation bias, a classic example is if you've never planned to buy a car, or pick something else, and then you suddenly decide to plan to buy a car, and you start seeing car ads everywhere. You might even notice cars on the street. This is your brain just noticing relevant information that it largely ignored before. Now granted, in this age of social media, once you start looking to buy a car, you will actually see more car ads, but I think my main point still holds. Next time you're walking outside, start thinking about all the electricity poles, or windows, or trees, and try to see every pole or window or tree you encounter. It might just seem like these poles are mysteriously, randomly appearing, and trees are appearing determinedly, I guess. Until next time, think better to act better.
All right, Cristina, give us a history lesson about conspiracy theories.
Here we are in late July, and we're still walking on eggshells trying to navigate life through a pandemic. Now, for some people around the world, things are unfortunately getting worse. So it can be especially frustrating when you sit back watching COVID conspiracy theory after COVID conspiracy theory get shared around that help fan the flames of misinformation. Before I move on, here's a quick definition of conspiracy theories according to Wikipedia. A conspiracy theory is an explanation for an event or situation that invokes a conspiracy by sinister and powerful groups, often political in motivation, when other explanations are more probable. The term has a pejorative connotation, implying that the appeal to a conspiracy is based on prejudice or insufficient evidence. Of course, not all conspiracy theories turn out to be false, right, Pat?
Yeah.
Now, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver recently did a segment with an excellent overview of COVID-19 related conspiracy theories and how the coronavirus has created a, quote, perfect storm for conspiracy theorists. Oliver's quoting an article in The Atlantic there. He highlights a few conspiracy theories from it was created by the pharmaceutical industry to sell vaccines, to 5G can spread it nonsense, to just straight up, it's a hoax. And if we thought only a small percentage of people spread false news around, he points to a paper published in the American Journal of Political Science in 2014 called Conspiracy Theories and the Paranoid Styles of Mass Opinion, which says over half of the American population consistently endorses some kind of conspiratorial narrative. And I'm not precious. We're all guilty of it or have been guilty of it at some point. Karen Douglas, a professor of social psychology at the University of Kent and an expert in conspiratorial thinking, tells Fox's Jane Coaston, quote, conspiracy theories flourish in times of crisis, which is obviously the case here. They tend to surround big events that require big explanations because small explanations are unsatisfying. The authors of the Atlantic article I mentioned, Joseph E. Usinski and Adam M. Enders, also explain, quote, here we have a global pandemic, a crashing economy, social isolation, and restrictive government policies. All of these can cause feelings of extreme anxiety, powerlessness, and stress, which in turn encourage conspiracy beliefs. One of the worst offenders seems to be a widely discredited documentary, some of you may have heard of it, called Plandemic. Pat, you watched that entire doc.
I did watch the entire doc, yes.
Now, the doc features Judy Mikovits, a former research scientist and anti-vaccine activist, who suggests Fauci manufactured, that's as in Dr. Fauci. Do I need to explain who Fauci is at this point? Dr. Fauci manufactured the COVID-19 virus and shipped it to China, amongst other false and potentially dangerous claims. I say potentially, but not going to waste another breath on this person other than to say I linked to a Snopes article that gives you details on the latest with this doc's shenanigans if you're interested. Okay, I get it. It's 2020. It's really easy for people to spread fake news. So when Oliver touched upon decades-old conspiracy theories about the Spanish flu and other plagues and pandemics, it really piqued my interest to look into. It's not something I really contemplated, but conspiracy theories aren't unique to the 21st century. However, back then, we're talking newspapers and the Telegraph, not Facebook, that helped propagate this stuff. Now, Vox's Jane Coaston cites a conspiracy theory dating back to the Black Death, a 14th century bubonic plague outbreak that killed around 35% of Europe's population, a reported 25 million people. A conspiracy theory swelled that blamed Jewish people for the bubonic plague deaths, and in short, it claimed there was an international conspiracy by the Jewish to poison Christendom. These claims, very sadly, led to Jewish people being targets of brutal assaults and even murder. Now in Forbes, writer Alex Knapp details how the January 31st, 1890 European edition of the New York Herald suggested the electric light was somehow responsible for a global influenza outbreak.
Wow.
Now he's referring to the first modern influenza pandemic, aka the Russian flu, which is believed to have originated in the Russian Empire in 1889 and took 4 months to go worldwide. Of the 1.5 billion people on Earth at the time, it killed more than 1 million during its first wave. Says the Herald, quote, "The disease has raged chiefly in towns where the electric light is in common use." The paper went on to say in support of the claim that the influenza, quote, "has everywhere attacked telegraph employees." Another dubious theory Knapp mentions came from Dr. William Gentry, who got picked up by newspapers after claiming he had isolated microbes that caused the Russian flu. Now, according to Gentry, the source was, quote, "stardust passing through the Earth's atmosphere at regular 16 to 17-year intervals."
Wow.
That's so specific. Now, this theory was kiboshed by other medical experts before it seems to have caught much steam, thankfully. Now, then there's the Spanish flu, which we've been hearing a lot in the news in parallel to the current pandemic. And it's estimated that between 1/3 and half of the world's population was infected by that disease. And although we don't know exactly how many people died, numbers range from 20 to 100 million people. Hertz magazine writer Ofer Adaret, my apologies for any mispronunciation, does a deep dive on the many rumors that emerged during the Spanish flu. So these examples come from his coverage. Unsurprisingly, one of the first rumors targets a group for the disease spread, specifically the Germans. A journalist named Josef Hoffmann in the Hebrew language paper in 1918 reported, German boats that cruise under the water brought to the shores of Spain those strange bacilli which infect people with the disease. Now, this led many to believe the deadly flu was being weaponized by the Germans. Another story claimed Germans used U-boats to infiltrate Boston Harbor, then secretly snuck on shore, armed with germ-filled vials, which they subsequently let loose in crowded places. Sketchy eyewitness accounts help fuel these stories. Gina Collada, who is a science reporter for the New York Times and author of Flu, the story of the great influenza pandemic of 1918 and the search for the virus that caused it, mentions one eyewitness, an old woman who said she saw a greasy-looking cloud that floated over the harbor and wafted over the docks. Okay. So the last one I'll mention is actually one of the scarier lauded theories, at least to me, because it seems plausible, for lack of a better word, considering what was going on at the time in history. The rumor was that German pharmaceutical company Bayer had tainted the aspirin they manufactured and sold to consumers in an effort to spread the influenza, which, as you can imagine, is a pretty serious allegation. And that rumor did take off. According to History Engine, Bayer had to start running ads in U.S. papers in late 1918 to reassure people that, quote, "the manufacture of Bayer tablets and capsules of aspirin is completely under American control," and, quote, "they may be used with full confidence."
Interesting.
I don't know if it makes me or you guys feel any better that dubious and dangerous claims around events like a pandemic have been around for ages, but it doesn't mean that we don't try and do our part, checkers, to stop them from proliferating in 2020.
Well, thanks, Cristina. And with that, we will leave you with Adam and a segment about the closest galaxy. I hope everyone out there is staying safe and healthy, and we will talk to you soon.
Stay classy, not smartassy, and please stay safe.
What's up, cuboids? Last month on episode 590, I did a segment looking at whether or not Luke Skywalker was human. I got a couple of pieces of feedback from this, which I wanted to use to update my segment. Now, the first was an email from listener Brian, and it reads, Adam's discussion considering Luke and Han not being human was interesting, however, they most definitely are. As one reference, C-3PO states in Empire, don't worry about Master Luke. I'm sure he'll be alright, he's quite clever, for a human being. And no need to contrive an intelligent design or time travel loophole to contend with their humanness. One quite parsimonious solution is to accept that the omniscient narrator behind A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away as simply unreliable. To that end, with a handful of physics tweaks, the Star Wars universe can indeed take place in our future, in our galaxy. The fact our galaxy is moving quickly adds credence to the far, far away prevarication. Either way, the literary device of that timeless yet misleading herald serves as a dark side deception to intrigue and distance the audience from the Star Wars world and its characters sufficient to suspend disbelief, grabbing our attention like a victim of a Vader chokehold. Cheers from the middle of the continent, Brian. So, great point. I can't believe I overlooked. So Luke is straight up referred to as a human in the very film I was talking about in the scene which immediately precedes it. So, interesting point about the galaxy moving. So, even our own galaxy in the past or future would be far, far away. The same could be said about the sun, the earth, or anything on it. We hardly refer to our past selves as having been from far, far away, though this is technically true depending on your frame of reference. And that's an important consideration as the galaxy moves only relative to some other point of reference, though that speed is in the hundreds of kilometers per second. As for us simply ignoring the statement that the Star Wars galaxy was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, this does of course make some sense. It may very well be that this was the original intention and that this was sort of tacked on. One can't ignore the similarities between that expression and something like once upon a time in a kingdom far, far away. So if we ignore the one statement, I think Star Wars taking place in a distant future, so far away that they've essentially forgotten or don't care that they came from Earth could work, but I also think that's not really necessary aside from the fact that there are humans in the series and we need to find a way to explain why they're human. Now, I recently rewatched the movie Spaceballs, which similarly confuses past and present. In the movie, which is a spoof of Star Wars made in 1987, that was a few years after Return of the Jedi, starts with a similar opening line. And I quote, "In a galaxy very, 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 very far away, there lived a ruthless race of beings known as Spaceballs." Now, they don't say a long time ago, but they use the past tense saying there lived. Later in the film, when Dark Helmet expresses frustration with the cancel self-destruct button being out of service, he says, "Even in the future, nothing works." So, Spaceballs takes place in the future. Of course, the line is nonsense, as one does not generally consider themselves to be in the future, as there is no other frame of reference to compare themselves to. It's a joke in a joke movie, but it seems like it's meant to take place in our future, in the future of the audience. So there's nothing so obvious in Star Wars, but this speaks to the basic assumption from the audience that sci-fi takes place in the future, even though that opening line is sort of a throwback to some kind of old fantasy stories, fairy tales, those being written at a time where people didn't really have the same concept of the evolution of technology and time and things like that. So right, I suppose they are human in Star Wars after all, and of course that doesn't make much sense in a galaxy far, far away, but it's a movie, whatever. Maybe there's also reasons like why they speak English, why they look like us, and odd things like that. So thank you very much, Brian, for the email. I appreciate getting more insight on this topic, and we had a nice exchange about science fiction afterwards. Now I got another piece of feedback from the episode, and that was from producer Pat. I mentioned in the segment that the closest galaxy to ours was Andromeda. I assume this to be true, as I had heard it a number of times and never really questioned it. There's an interesting manga series named Andromeda Stories, which takes place in the Andromeda Galaxy, which insinuates that life on Earth was seeded from life forms which traveled from Andromeda to the Milky Way Galaxy. So unlike in Star Wars, that series gives us a scientifically valid reason for which the characters in Andromeda Stories are indistinguishable from Earth humans despite being very far away. Now, Pat challenged my basic assumption here by suggesting that the closest galaxy is somehow within the Milky Way galaxy, which isn't something I'd heard, but I think I need to set the story straight. Andromeda is the closest spiral galaxy to the Milky Way, which is also a spiral galaxy. It's quite far at 2.5 million light years from the Earth. So could we technically say that the closest galaxy is the Milky Way? It's an odd way of saying it. It's a bit of a trick answer. But what else is there? Now, the closest galaxy to the Earth, which is where the intended viewers of the 1977 Star Wars film and its sequels would have lived, would be the Canis Major Dwarf Galaxy. And this is some 42,000 light years from the center of the Milky Way and about 25,000 light years from the Earth, which makes it closer to the Earth than the center of our own galaxy, which is about 30,000 light years away. So how does that even work? Well, basically, this galaxy sort of overlaps our own. This is conceptually a bit difficult to grasp when you compare a galaxy to, say, a basketball, where you can't have two basketballs occupying the same space. But consider that most of space is just vast swaths of nothingness, and that you can have galaxies that can occupy some of the same space. It's difficult to explain exactly how it looks, but there's a nice image in the links that I have on the show notes at trcpodcast.com. Now, the Milky Way galaxy is a nice spiral galaxy, and then we have this Canis Major Dwarf Galaxy, which is like a snake that goes around within it. While the galaxy itself has a mass of stars, there's a long snake-like trail that wraps around the Milky Way galaxy 3 times. And this galaxy actually has about 1 billion stars in it, so it is considerable in size. Before this galaxy was discovered right under our nose, the closest galaxy was still not considered to be Andromeda, but rather the Sagittarius Dwarf Galaxy, which is about 70,000 light years from the Earth. Now, this galaxy is so close to the Milky Way that some of its stars are being pulled away by the Milky Way, and this is done through tidal forces, which have caused the Sagittarius Dwarf Galaxy to lose about half of its stars and gas over the last billion of years, so they've been siphoned off by the Milky Way galaxy. So maybe it was a different shape during the events of the Star Wars films, depending on how long ago that actually was. The galaxy has 4 tails of stars coming out of it, just based on various things that have happened to it. So before that, the closest galaxy was thought to be the Large Magellanic Cloud, an irregular dwarf galaxy, which is some 180,000 light years from Earth. So the Andromeda Galaxy is quite far away. What with gravity doing what it does, the Milky Way and Andromeda galaxies are approaching each other at a speed of about 100 kilometers per second, which is pretty fast compared to, say, a horse or a car. Now, we should see our 2 galaxies merging in another 4 billion years or so. I certainly hope to be around to see that, or at least that some human or human-descended or created species around at the time to witness that event. This seems like a pretty inefficient way to visit another galaxy, but waiting for it to merge with ours could take a while, so perhaps we'll already have visited Andromeda by then. I suppose the people in the Star Wars galaxy are human after all. Though this probably raises more questions than it answers for those of us who are too stubborn to sit back and admit that, hey, it's just a movie and we can just enjoy it. As for galaxies, the closest one to Earth isn't actually Andromeda, but the Canis Major Dwarf Galaxy, which is slowly but surely having all of its mass absorbed by the Milky Way. Space is vast and big, and it's not always obvious where something ends and something else begins, but astronomers are always hard at work trying to figure these kind of things out. Peace out, cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.